My brother-in-law refused to pay me for 2 years of work at his business, and my sister said I should be grateful for the experience. So, I showed them how to run real business. My sister Grace married Vincent when I was 22 and fresh out of trade school. I had my electrician's license, but no experience and no connections. Vincent owned a small electrical contracting company. He did residential work mostly. New builds, renovations, panel upgrades. He had about 6 employees and more jobs than he could handle. Grace suggested I come work for him. She said it would be good for everyone. I'd get experience. Vincent would get reliable help. We'd all be one big happy family. Vincent agreed, but he had conditions. He said he couldn't pay me a full salary right away. The business was growing and cash flow was tight. He said he'd pay me a small weekly amount for living expenses, and then we'd settle up properly once things stabilized. He said 6 months, maybe a year at most. I was young and stupid and trusted my own sister, so I said yes. The weekly amount was $200. I was working 50 hours minimum, sometimes 60. I was doing the same jobs as his other guys, sometimes harder ones because I was eager to prove myself. His regular employees were making $25 to $30 an hour. I was making less than $4. But I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Vincent was good for it. I told myself Grace wouldn't let her own brother get cheated. 6 months passed. I asked Vincent about getting paid properly. He said the business was still finding its feet. He said give it a few more months, and he said I was learning so much, wasn't that worth something? I talked to Grace about it. She said Vincent was under a lot of pressure. She said I should be patient. She said the experience I was gaining was more valuable than a paycheck anyway. So I waited. A year passed. I asked again. Vincent got annoyed. He said I was being ungrateful. He said he took a chance on me when no one else would. He said if I wanted to leave, I could leave, but I'd be starting from zero somewhere else. He made it sound like he was doing me a favor by not paying me. Grace backed him up. She said I was part of the family business now. She said I needed to think long term. She said money wasn't everything. Easy to say when you're living in a 4-bedroom house your husband bought. I stayed another year. I don't know why. Maybe I kept hoping things would change. Maybe I was scared to start over. Maybe I just couldn't believe my own sister would let this happen. By the end of year 2, I'd done the math. At a normal rate, Vincent owed me over $90,000. I brought this up one Sunday dinner at their house. I showed him the numbers. Hours worked, market rate for a licensed electrician, minus what he'd already paid me. $93,000 and change. Vincent laughed. He actually laughed. He said those numbers were fantasy. He said I was an apprentice, not a journeyman. He said the $200 a week was more than fair for someone learning the trade. I pointed out that I came in with my license. I wasn't learning. I was working. He said the license was just paper. Real knowledge came from experience. Experience he gave me. Grace told me I was ruining dinner. She said I was being dramatic. She said if I was so unhappy, maybe I should find another job. So I did. I quit the next day. No notice, no explanation, just a text to Vincent saying I wouldn't be in. He called me 12 times. I didn't answer. I had saved almost nothing from those 2 years. The $200 a week barely covered my rent and food. But I had something else. I had 2 years of experience working every neighborhood in the city. I knew the builders. I knew the suppliers. I knew which inspectors were strict and which ones were reasonable. I knew how Vincent priced his jobs, and I knew he was overcharging by at least 15%. I got a job with another contractor for 3 months, just long enough to save some money and make a plan. Then I filed for my own business license. I called it Proper Electrical Services. Simple name, easy to remember. I started small, just me, my tools, and a used van. I reached out to every builder and general contractor I'd met while working for Vincent. I told them I was on my own now. I told them my rates were fair and my work was solid. A few of them gave me a shot. Word spread. Within 6 months, I had more work than I could handle alone. I hired my first employee, then my second. By the end of year 1, I had a crew of 4 and a real office. I wasn't rich, but I was building something that was actually mine. Vincent noticed. Of course he noticed. Some of his regular clients had switched to me, not because I poached them, because they liked my work better and my prices were lower. He called me about a year after I left. He said I was stealing his business. He said I was using contacts I made on his time. He said it was unethical. I asked him if it was ethical to not pay his own brother-in-law for 2 years of labor. He hung up. Grace called the next day. She started talking before I could even say hello. Mom was upset. She wanted to know why I couldn't just let things go. I was tearing the family apart over something that happened years ago. I listened to her voice get higher and tighter until she finally stopped to breathe. Then I told her I let things go for 2 years while Vincent stole from me. I let it go while he paid his other guys fair wages and gave me scraps. Now I was succeeding on my own, and that made her mad. She went quiet for a second. Then she came back with how Vincent was struggling financially, how I took his best clients, how his business was falling apart because of me. I reminded her those clients chose me. They picked my company because I did better work for fair prices. Nobody forced them to switch. Grace got quiet again when I pointed out that Vincent clearly had money to pay his other employees properly. Just not his own brother-in-law. He found $25 to $30 an hour for strangers, but couldn't manage more than $4 for family. She tried to say something, but I kept going. The math was simple, and she knew it. The call went downhill fast after that. Grace said I had changed, that I was selfish now, that money mattered more to me than family. I told her she chose her husband's lies over her own brother's livelihood 2 years ago. She made that choice every time she told me to be patient, every time she said experience was more valuable than a paycheck. I hung up feeling angry but also relieved. I finally said what needed saying. No more pretending things were okay when they weren't. Max was at the office when I walked in. He took one look at my face and asked if everything was okay. I gave him the basic story. Worked for family, got screwed over, sister sided with the guy who screwed me. He nodded and said his uncle did something similar to his cousin. Promised him part ownership of a landscaping business if he worked cheap for a few years. 5 years later, the cousin was still cutting grass for minimum wage, and the uncle bought a boat. Max said he got it. Some people think family means you work for free. Clyde called the next day. He had a major commercial project and wanted me to quote on the electrical work. A new restaurant complex going up on the east side. 3 separate dining spaces plus a shared kitchen. Full build-out. He sent over the plans, and I looked through them that night. This was the biggest opportunity I'd had so far. The job was worth maybe $40,000 in revenue, more than I made in 6 months when I first started. I told Clyde I'd get him a quote by Monday. I spent the weekend working on the bid. Janet came by Saturday afternoon to help with the financial projections. We sat at my kitchen table with the plans spread out and went through every circuit, every outlet, every light fixture. Janet plugged numbers into her laptop while I calculated materials and labor hours. The numbers worked even with my lower pricing model. I could come in under what Vincent would charge and still make good profit. Enough to hire a 3rd employee, enough to upgrade some equipment, maybe get a second van so we could run 2 crews. Janet printed out the final bid sheet and I reviewed it 3 times. Everything looked solid, professional, competitive. Monday morning, I emailed the bid to Clyde at 8. He called back at 2 that afternoon. I got the job. He said my quote was professional and competitive. Then he mentioned Vincent bid too. Came in 15% higher with a proposal that was basically just a price on a sheet of paper. No breakdown, no timeline, no detail work. Clyde said he appreciated the thoroughness of my bid, made him confident I knew what I was doing. I hired Tucker the following week. He was 23 and fresh out of trade school. Reminded me of myself a few years back, eager to work, wanted to prove himself. I interviewed him at the office and he showed up in clean work clothes with his license and a folder of his test scores. I asked him what he expected for pay. He said he'd take whatever I thought was fair since he didn't have much experience. I told him $22 an hour to start. His eyes got wide. He asked if I was serious. I said completely serious. I remembered what it felt like to work hard and get paid nothing. Nobody on my crew would ever feel that way. Bobby texted me out of nowhere on Thursday. Heard about the restaurant job. Congratulations. Said he always thought what Vincent did to me was wrong. Several of the crew felt the same way, but nobody wanted to say anything and risk their jobs. I thanked him and asked how things were going at Vincent's company. Bobby said it was getting rough. Vincent was stressed, snapping at employees over small stuff, bidding on jobs like he was desperate. The atmosphere wasn't good anymore. Bobby mentioned 2 more regular clients had switched to other contractors recently. Not to me specifically, but away from Vincent. Word was getting around that his work quality had dropped. Jobs were taking longer. Estimates were all over the place. One client had to call him back twice to fix problems with a panel installation. That kind of thing spreads fast in this business. Contractors talk, builders talk. Once your reputation starts sliding, it's hard to stop. I watched Vincent's business slide while mine grew. The satisfaction was real, but it didn't fill the gap where my sister used to be. Mom called on a Tuesday evening. I was at the office finishing paperwork when her name showed up on my phone. She started with small talk about the weather and her garden. Then she got to the point. She wanted me to come to Sunday dinner. Just family. She said it was time we all sat down and talked like adults. She said Grace missed me and Vincent was willing to discuss things. I asked what there was to discuss. Mom said we needed to move past this. I told her I was willing to talk, but only if Vincent brought a check for $93,000 plus interest. Mom went quiet. Then she said I was being unreasonable. She said family was more important than money. I felt my jaw tighten. I explained that Vincent made it about money when he exploited my labor for 2 years. I said Grace made it about family when she told me to be grateful for being used. Mom said I was twisting things. She said Vincent made mistakes, but he was still family. I asked if I was still family when I was working 60-hour weeks for $200. She didn't answer that. She just said she hoped I would reconsider and hung up. The restaurant project started the following Monday. Max and Tucker showed up at the site at 7 in the morning with the van loaded. I met them there with the plans and we did a walkthrough with the general contractor. The space was gutted down to studs. Clean slate. We mapped out the panel locations and started running conduit. Max worked the main dining area while Tucker handled the kitchen circuits. I supervised and jumped in where needed. The work went smooth. No surprises in the walls, no hidden problems. By end of week 1, we had rough and done for the entire first floor. Clyde stopped by on Friday afternoon. He walked the site with his clipboard checking our work. He nodded at the panel installation. He tested a few connections. Then he told me he was impressed. He said the quality was excellent and we were ahead of schedule. He mentioned he had more projects coming up if I was interested. I told him I was always interested in good work. Diane called the next week. I was in the van heading to a supply run when her name showed up. She asked if I had time for a big project. I said depends on the timeline. She told me about a subdivision of townhouses. 32 units needing complete electrical throughout. She said it would be steady work for months. I asked why she was calling me instead of her usual contractors. She said she was done with Vincent. He missed deadlines on her last 2 projects. His crew seemed disorganized. One job had to be inspected 3 times because of code violations. She said she couldn't afford that kind of hassle. I told her I'd put together a bid and get it to her by end of week. She said she'd wait to hear from me. The days got longer. I was working 12-hour stretches most days, sometimes 14. But it felt different from working for Vincent. Every hour was mine. Every dollar I earned actually went to me. I was building something real, something with my name on it. Janet called me one evening after I'd been at a job site since 6 that morning. She said she needed to talk about the business. We met at a coffee shop near her office. She pulled out her laptop and showed me the numbers. Revenue was up. Way up. But she was worried about me. She said I was working too many hours. She said burnout was real, and I needed to think about sustainable growth. She suggested I hire another electrician sooner rather than later. Maybe even look at a project manager to handle scheduling. I told her I'd think about it. She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me. Grace texted 3 days later. The message came through while I was pulling wire in an attic. She asked if we could meet for coffee. Just the 2 of us. No Vincent. I stared at the message for a while. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me was curious what she wanted to say. I texted back that I could do Saturday morning. She sent back a thumbs up. Saturday morning, I got to the coffee shop first. I ordered black coffee and sat at a table by the window. Grace showed up 10 minutes late. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She ordered something with a lot of milk and sugar and sat down across from me. She didn't say anything at first, just stirred her coffee and looked out the window. Then she said things had been tense at home. Vincent was stressed about the business. He was drinking more, getting angry about small stuff. She said he was obsessed with me, with my success, with how I was doing better while he was struggling. I didn't say anything. I just waited. She asked how I was doing. I said I was fine, busy. She nodded like she expected that answer. I asked her directly if she understood why I left, if she understood why I was angry. She gave me a long answer about seeing both sides, about how relationships were complicated, about how business and family shouldn't mix. I let her finish. Then I asked a simpler question. Was Vincent wrong to not pay me? She looked down at her coffee. She said it was complicated. I asked how it was complicated. She said Vincent had expenses. The business was growing. Cash flow was tight. I reminded her those were the same excuses from 2 years ago. She said I was being harsh. I said I was being accurate. I told Grace I loved her, but I couldn't have a relationship with her if she wouldn't acknowledge what Vincent did was theft. Not a complicated family situation, not a misunderstanding. Theft. She started crying. She said I was forcing her to choose between her husband and her brother. People at other tables were looking over. I kept my voice calm. I explained that she already chose 2 years ago, when she told me to be grateful for being exploited, when she backed Vincent's excuses instead of standing up for her own brother. I said I was just finally accepting her choice. She wiped her eyes with a napkin. She said that wasn't fair. I said fair would have been getting paid for my work. We sat there for another minute in silence. Then she got up and left. I finished my coffee and watched people walk past outside. I felt sad, but also clear. Like something that had been muddy was finally settled. I spent the next week putting together the townhouse bid. I measured out the electrical needs for all 32 units. I calculated wire runs and panel loads. I priced out materials from 3 different suppliers to get the best rates. I built in labor costs that were fair to my crew and still kept my total under what I knew Vincent would charge. Janet looked over my numbers and said they were solid. She pointed out a few places where I could adjust the payment schedule to help with cash flow. I submitted the bid on a Friday afternoon. Diane called me Monday morning and said I got the job. She said my proposal was professional and detailed, and my price was competitive without being suspiciously low. The contract meant 8 months of steady work. It meant I could plan ahead instead of scrambling for the next job. Janet helped me set up the payment schedule so I'd get draws at specific completion points. That same week, I went to the bank and applied for a small business loan. I needed a second work van and some additional tools now that I was running bigger jobs. The bank manager looked at my financials and my contract with Diane. He approved the loan in 3 days. I bought a used van that was in good shape and had it wrapped with my company logo. Tucker mentioned during lunch break that he had a friend from trade school who was looking for work. I told him to have her call me. She called that afternoon. Her name was already on my roster from when I'd checked references, but I wanted to meet her in person. We sat down the following Tuesday at my office. She was young, maybe 23, and clearly nervous. I asked about her experience, and she was honest that she didn't have much beyond school and a few small residential jobs. I offered her apprentice wages with a clear path for raises tied to skill development. She accepted and started the next Monday. My crew was now 4 people, including me: Max, Tucker, the new apprentice, and myself. We started running 2 job sites at the same time. Max led one crew with the apprentice while I worked with Tucker on the other. The coordination was harder than I expected. I had to check in on both sites multiple times a day to make sure everything stayed on schedule. I was working 12-hour days again, but this time it was different because I was building something mine. Ronald called me on a Wednesday afternoon. He was a client who had used both me and Vincent over the past few years for different projects. He said he wanted to let me know he was going exclusively with my company from now on. I asked him why, and he said Vincent's recent work had been sloppy. He'd had to call Vincent back twice on his last job to fix issues with a sub-panel installation. He said my work was cleaner and my guys showed up on time. I thanked him and added his name to my regular client list. I ran into Bobby at the electrical supply house the next week. He was picking up materials, and I was grabbing some additional wire for the townhouse project. He pulled me aside near the loading dock. He said Vincent was talking about me constantly at work, blaming me for all his problems, saying I stole his clients and ruined his reputation. Bobby said the atmosphere at Vincent's shop had become toxic. He said some of the crew were looking for other jobs because Vincent was angry all the time and taking it out on everyone. I told Bobby I was sorry he had to deal with that, but I hadn't done anything wrong. Bobby said he knew that. He said everyone knew that. Vincent showed up at one of my job sites 2 days later. I was working on the townhouse project when Max called me over and said someone was asking for me. I walked to the front of the building and Vincent was standing there next to his truck. He looked rough. Unshaved, wrinkled shirt, bags under his eyes. He started in immediately saying I was sabotaging his reputation and stealing his employees. I told him I needed to get back to work. He followed me saying we needed to talk about this. I stopped and turned around. I kept my voice calm and told him I had never badmouthed him to anyone. I said clients chose me based on my work quality and my pricing. Vincent got in my face. He said I owed him for training me, that everything I knew came from working for him. Max walked up and asked if there was a problem. Vincent looked at Max and then at the rest of my crew who had stopped working to watch. He backed off a step. He pointed at me and said this wasn't over. Then he got in his truck and drove off. I went inside and called the non-emergency police line. I filed a report documenting the confrontation. I gave them Vincent's name and license plate number. The officer said it was good to have it on record in case he escalated. Clyde called me that evening. He said he'd heard about the job site incident through the contractor network. Word traveled fast in this business. He asked if I was okay and I said I was fine. Clyde said Vincent had been acting erratic lately. He said Vincent was losing bids because his proposals seemed rushed and desperate. He said a few contractors had stopped working with Vincent entirely because his quality had dropped. I thanked Clyde for checking in and told him I appreciated the heads up. Grace called that night while I was finishing paperwork at the office. Her voice sounded wrong from the first word, shaky and wet like she'd been crying for a while. She said Vincent came home after leaving my job site and punched a hole in their kitchen wall. Just walked in and slammed his fist straight through the drywall next to the refrigerator. She said he was screaming about me ruining his life and taking everything from him. She said she tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't stop pacing and yelling. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. She said she was scared, not annoyed or frustrated, scared. I asked if he'd hurt her and she said no, but the way she said it made me think she wasn't sure he wouldn't. I told her she needed to get out of there. Go stay with Mom for a few days until Vincent calmed down. She went quiet for a long time and then said she didn't want to make things worse. I felt that old frustration rising up, the same feeling I'd had for 2 years watching her make excuses for him. I told her making things worse wasn't possible when your husband was punching holes in walls. She said she'd think about it and hung up before I could say anything else. The next morning, my lawyer called about something routine with the business paperwork. I mentioned the situation with Vincent showing up at my job site and the wall punching incident Grace told me about. The lawyer got quiet and then asked if I'd ever considered a formal demand letter for the unpaid wages. I hadn't really thought about legal action beyond just moving on and building my own thing. He explained that a demand letter would create documentation of the debt and start the clock on potential legal action. It would be official record that Vincent owed me money and refused to pay. I sat with that idea for a few days. I didn't expect Vincent to actually pay if I sent a letter. The man laughed in my face when I showed him the numbers. But having it documented felt important somehow. Like proof that I wasn't crazy or ungrateful or dramatic. Proof that $93,000 was real money he actually owed me. I told the lawyer to draft the letter. He put together something professional that laid out the hours worked, the market rate for a licensed electrician, what Vincent had actually paid me, and the difference owed. The letter gave Vincent 30 days to respond with either full payment or a proposal for a payment plan. We sent it certified mail so there'd be proof he received it. I knew what would happen. I knew Vincent would lose his mind. But I sent it anyway because sometimes you have to draw a line and say this actually happened and you can't just pretend it didn't. Vincent got the letter on a Tuesday. I know because he called me 3 hours later absolutely screaming into the phone. He said I was trying to destroy him. He said I was a vindictive piece of garbage who couldn't handle that he gave me a chance. He said the demand letter was harassment and his lawyer would shut me down. I let him yell for a while and then I said one thing. I told him he destroyed our relationship when he stole $93,000 from me and worked me like a dog for 2 years. I said the letter was just documenting facts. He called me more names and hung up. Grace texted me an hour later. The message was long and rambling, but the basic point was she was begging me to drop the legal action. She said it would bankrupt Vincent. She said it would ruin their lives. She said I was being cruel. I read the text 3 times before I responded. I kept my answer short. I told her Vincent had 2 years to pay me fairly and chose not to. I said consequences were his responsibility, not mine. She didn't text back. Janet called me into her office the next week to go over the monthly numbers. She had spreadsheets pulled up on her computer, and she was smiling. She showed me the revenue column and explained that for the 3rd month in a row, my business was bringing in more money than Vincent's company made when I worked for him. I knew we were doing well, but seeing the actual numbers lined up like that hit different. I'd built something bigger than what Vincent had in just over a year, without exploiting anyone, without lying to family, just fair prices and solid work. I felt proud in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Not proud like bragging, proud like I'd proven something to myself about what I was actually worth. Bobby texted me that same week. The message was direct. He said he was giving Vincent his 2-week notice and asked if I was hiring. I stared at that text for a while before responding. Bobby was Vincent's lead guy. Him leaving would hurt Vincent's operation significantly. But that wasn't my problem, and I wasn't going to turn down a skilled electrician because of Vincent's feelings. I told Bobby I'd consider hiring him, but he needed to understand I wouldn't get involved in any drama with Vincent over him leaving. Bobby said he got it and just wanted to work somewhere the boss wasn't having a breakdown every other day. I told him to call me after his notice period ended, and we'd talk details. The 30 days on the demand letter passed with no response from Vincent. Not a call, not a letter, nothing. My lawyer filed a civil lawsuit for the unpaid wages. He explained it would take months to work through the court system. There'd be discovery and depositions and probably settlement discussions before it ever got near a trial. I signed the paperwork and tried not to think about how my sister would react. I didn't have to wait long to find out. Mom called me 2 days after the lawsuit was filed. She was upset in that specific way she got when she thought her kids were fighting over something stupid. She said I was tearing the family apart over money. She said Grace was a mess and Vincent was talking about losing everything. She said I needed to drop this and move on. I took a breath and reminded her that Vincent tore the family apart when he exploited me for 2 years. I said Grace tore it apart when she told me to be grateful for being used. I told Mom I was just refusing to pretend it didn't happen anymore. She said I was being stubborn and I'd regret this someday. I told her maybe I would, but at least I'd regret standing up for myself instead of regret letting people walk all over me. She hung up without saying goodbye. Grace stopped calling after the lawsuit got filed. I tried texting her a few times in the first week, but she never responded. Mom called me about 10 days later and said Grace was standing by her husband no matter what. She said Grace felt like I was attacking their family and trying to ruin Vincent's business on purpose. I told Mom that Grace made her choice a long time ago when she picked Vincent's lies over my unpaid labor. Mom said I was being stubborn and that family should forgive family. I asked her if Vincent ever planned to pay me the $93,000 he owed, and she went quiet. She said she didn't know, and then changed the subject to asking when I'd come for dinner again. I told her I'd come when Grace was ready to admit what Vincent did was wrong, not before. She sighed and hung up. It hurt knowing my sister chose Vincent over me, but I couldn't keep pretending it didn't happen just to keep peace. Grace picked her side, and I had to accept that even if it felt like losing part of my family. Diane called me 2 days later about some builders she worked with regularly. She said she'd been telling them about my company and how reliable my work was compared to other contractors in the area. She gave me 3 names and numbers, said they were all looking for good electrical contractors they could trust. I called the first one that afternoon, and he said Diane had recommended me highly. He had a commercial renovation starting in 6 weeks and needed a quote. I drove out to look at the site the next morning and put together numbers that evening. The second builder called me before I could reach out to him. He said Diane told him I was fair on pricing and always finished on time. He wanted quotes on 2 residential projects starting next month. The third builder emailed me asking about my availability for a shopping center remodel in the fall. Within a week, I had quotes submitted on all 3 projects, and my calendar was booking out 2 months ahead. It felt surreal looking at my schedule and seeing steady work lined up that far in advance. A year ago, I was scraping by on $200 a week, and now I had more jobs than I could handle. The business was growing based purely on doing quality work and treating clients fairly, exactly the opposite of how Vincent ran things. Word started spreading in the contractor community about Vincent's lawsuit. Clyde called me to ask if everything was okay with my business, and I told him it was fine, that the lawsuit was about Vincent owing me unpaid wages from when I worked for him. Clyde said he'd heard rumors that Vincent was involved in legal trouble, and some contractors were nervous about working with him. A week later, Bobby texted me that Vincent lost a major contract for a new apartment complex. The client found out about the lawsuit and decided they didn't want to deal with the drama. Bobby said the client specifically mentioned they were concerned about Vincent's business practices and reliability. The contractor network is small and everyone talks. Once people heard Vincent was sued for unpaid wages, it made them question whether he'd been fair with other people too. I didn't spread the story around, but I didn't hide it either. When contractors asked me directly, I told them the truth about working 2 years for almost nothing, while Vincent charged clients full price for my labor. Some of them said they'd had issues with Vincent's billing before, nothing major but enough to make them wonder. Vincent's reputation was taking hits he couldn't afford, and it was all because of choices he made years ago finally catching up to him. Bobby's 2-week notice period ended and I hired him officially. He showed up for his first day looking relieved to be working somewhere that wasn't falling apart. We were doing a panel upgrade at a commercial building, and Bobby worked fast and clean, exactly the kind of experience I needed on the crew. During lunch, he mentioned Vincent's company was down to 3 employees now. 2 guys quit the same week Bobby gave notice, and Vincent hadn't replaced them. Bobby said Vincent was barely getting by on small residential jobs, basic stuff like outlet installations and light fixture replacements. The bigger contracts were drying up because Vincent couldn't compete on price or reliability anymore. Bobby said the office felt like a morgue the last few weeks he was there, with Vincent stressed and snapping at everyone over minor things. I asked if Vincent ever mentioned me, and Bobby said yeah, constantly. Vincent blamed me for every client he lost and every employee who quit. Bobby said it got old fast listening to Vincent complain instead of fixing his actual business problems. I felt a little bad hearing how far Vincent had fallen, but mostly I felt like he earned every bit of it by refusing to pay me fairly when he had the chance. The lawsuit moved into discovery phase, and my lawyer requested Vincent's financial records. It took a few weeks, but eventually Vincent's lawyer had to turn over bank statements, client invoices, and payroll records going back 3 years. My lawyer called me into his office to go over what they found. He spread the documents across his desk and showed me invoice after invoice where Vincent charged clients $25 to $30 per hour for my labor. The invoices listed me as a licensed electrician working on the projects. Then he showed me Vincent's payroll records, which proved he only paid me $200 per week no matter how many hours I worked. My lawyer did the math right there in front of me. Vincent billed clients over $98,000 for my work over 2 years. He paid me $21,000 total. The difference was $77,000 that Vincent kept, while telling me the business couldn't afford to pay me properly. My lawyer said this strengthened our case significantly because it showed Vincent wasn't just struggling financially, he was actively profiting off my unpaid labor while lying about the company's situation. The records proved everything I'd been saying about being exploited. Vincent charged clients full price for a licensed electrician, then paid me less than minimum wage and pocketed the difference. It was theft, plain and simple, and now we had documentation proving it. 6 months after I filed the lawsuit, Vincent's lawyer contacted mine about settlement talks. My lawyer called me and said Vincent's side was finally acknowledging the debt existed, but they were claiming Vincent couldn't pay the full amount right away. His business was struggling and he didn't have $93,000 sitting in the bank. Vincent's lawyer wanted to discuss payment terms and settlement amounts. My lawyer asked what I wanted to do, and I said I wanted to hear their offer, but I wasn't going to just let Vincent off the hook completely. We set up a meeting for the following week. I went to my lawyer's office and sat through an hour of back and forth with Vincent's lawyer on a conference call. They offered $40,000 paid over 5 years. My lawyer said that was insulting and countered with $80,000 paid over 2 years. Vincent's lawyer said Vincent couldn't afford those terms. They went back and forth while I sat there getting more frustrated. Finally, Vincent's lawyer offered $60,000 paid over 3 years. My lawyer looked at me and I thought about it. $60,000 was less than the $93,000 owed, but it was more than I realistically expected to collect if we went to trial. My lawyer explained that going to court could get me a judgment for the full amount, but actually collecting it would be difficult if Vincent's business failed. A trial would cost money and time with no guarantee I'd see more than the settlement offer. Plus, there was the risk of Vincent declaring bankruptcy and me getting nothing at all. I told my lawyer I'd accept $60,000 over 3 years, but only if Vincent acknowledged in writing that he owed me for unpaid wages. I didn't just want the money, I wanted the admission that what he did was wrong. My lawyer negotiated that into the settlement agreement. Vincent had to sign a document stating he failed to pay me fair wages for 2 years of licensed electrical work and that he owed me compensation for that unpaid labor. The settlement wasn't about getting every dollar anymore. It was about the principle of making Vincent admit what he did. That written admission mattered more to me than the difference between $60,000 and $93,000. I signed the settlement papers and felt something close to relief. It wasn't perfect, but it was closure on a situation that had been eating at me for years. Vincent had to acknowledge his debt in writing and pay me in installments. The first payment was due in 30 days. Grace found out about the settlement and called me for the first time in months. I saw her name on my phone and almost didn't answer, but I picked up. She started yelling before I could even say hello. She said I should have dropped the lawsuit entirely, that accepting the settlement was just as bad as going to trial. She said I was destroying Vincent's business and ruining their lives over money that didn't matter. I let her finish and then asked her if she seriously thought $60,000 over 3 years was going to destroy Vincent. She said it wasn't about the amount, it was about me refusing to let things go and move on. I told her she was still missing the point completely. This was never about the money. It was about Vincent stealing from me for 2 years while she told me to be grateful. It was about them treating me like I didn't deserve fair pay because I was family. Grace said I was being dramatic and that Vincent made a mistake, but he didn't deserve to be punished forever. I asked her when she planned to apologize for telling me I should be grateful for being exploited, and she went silent. She couldn't even admit she was wrong about that part. I explained to Grace that Vincent's written admission of the debt validated everything I'd been saying from the start. He charged clients full price for my work and paid me almost nothing. The settlement agreement proved I wasn't exaggerating or being dramatic like she claimed. Vincent acknowledged in legal documents that he owed me for unpaid wages. That admission showed I was right to leave and right to demand what I was owed. Her refusal to see that, even with legal proof right in front of her, showed exactly where her loyalty was. She picked Vincent over me back when this started, and she was still picking him now even when the facts proved he exploited me. I told her I accepted that our relationship might never recover from this. She made her choice and I made mine. She said I was throwing away family over pride, and I said she threw away her brother the moment she told me to be grateful for being stolen from. She hung up on me without saying goodbye. I sat there holding my phone feeling sad, but also clear about everything. Grace wasn't going to change her mind, and I wasn't going to pretend Vincent didn't do what he did just to keep peace. Some relationships don't survive when people show you who they really are, and that's okay. I had my business and my crew and clients who respected my work. That was enough. 2 years. That's how long Proper Electrical Services had been running when I realized we'd actually made it past the point where most small businesses fail. I had 8 people on payroll now. Max was my lead guy. Tucker ran his own crew. Bobby brought in experience that made the bigger jobs smoother. We had 2 vans, a work truck, and an actual office with a receptionist who answered the phone while I was on site. The reputation we built wasn't just about doing good work. It was about treating people right. I paid everyone fair wages from day one. No waiting periods, no promises about settling up later. When someone worked 50 hours, they got paid for 50 hours at their proper rate. When we finished a job under budget, I split the savings as bonuses instead of pocketing it all. The crew knew I had their backs because I showed them every week with actual money in their accounts, not just words about being family. The first settlement check from Vincent arrived on a Tuesday morning. $20,000. Right on time according to the payment schedule his lawyer agreed to. I looked at that check and thought about what it represented. Vincent finally admitting in writing that he owed me. A legal document saying I was right about being exploited. But the money itself didn't mean as much as what I could do with it. I called a crew meeting that afternoon at the office. Everyone gathered around wondering what was up. I told them the settlement payment came through, and I was splitting half of it among them as bonuses. Max got quiet and his eyes got red. He said he'd worked in this trade for 15 years and never once had a boss share money like that. He said most contractors would have kept every penny and called it recovering losses. I told him we built this company together, and everyone who helped make it successful deserved to benefit from that success. Bobby pulled me aside after the meeting and mentioned he'd seen Vincent at the supply house the previous week. Said Vincent looked rough, tired, defeated. Bobby was grabbing materials for our townhouse project, and Vincent was there picking up a small order. Just basic residential stuff. Vincent saw Bobby and asked how I was doing. Not angry or confrontational. Just asked. Bobby told him I was doing great and treating my crew right. Vincent nodded and didn't say anything else. Just paid for his materials and left. Bobby said it seemed like maybe Vincent was starting to understand what he'd lost. Not just the clients or the money, but the chance to build something good by doing right by people. I ran into Mom at the grocery store on Saturday morning. I was grabbing coffee and she was in the produce section. She looked surprised to see me, but not uncomfortable. We talked for a minute about normal stuff, and then she mentioned Grace and Vincent were in marriage counseling. Said the financial stress had gotten bad. Vincent's anger issues were worse. He'd punched another hole in the wall at their house, yelled at Grace over small things. She said Grace was finally seeing some problems clearly. Mom's voice was careful when she said it, like she was testing whether I wanted to hear about them. I asked if Grace was safe and Mom said yes, that Grace was handling it. I nodded and started to walk away, but Mom touched my arm. She said she understood now why I was so hurt. Said she was sorry for not supporting me better when everything started. I looked at her and felt something shift. Not anger, just tiredness. We got coffee at the shop next door to the grocery store. Sat at a small table by the window. Mom kept apologizing and I finally told her I wasn't looking for apologies. I just wanted acknowledgement that what happened was wrong. That Vincent stole from me and Grace backed him up. Mom nodded and said she saw that now. Said she'd been so focused on keeping peace in the family that she didn't want to see how bad Vincent's treatment of me actually was. She admitted she made excuses for him because confronting it meant dealing with the fact that Grace married someone capable of that kind of exploitation. I appreciated her honesty. We finished our coffee and I told her I loved her, but I couldn't pretend things were fine with Grace and Vincent just to make family dinners easier. She said she understood. Clyde called me on Monday with something big. Said he wanted to talk about a partnership opportunity. We met at his office that afternoon and he laid out the details. Major commercial development project, new shopping complex with multiple buildings, full electrical contract worth over $200,000. He said my company's reputation had grown to where I was competing for serious contracts. The kind of work Vincent always wanted but never achieved because his bids were sloppy and his reputation was mixed. Clyde said he'd worked with me enough to know I could handle it. He wanted to partner on the project. His company doing the general contracting. Mine handling all electrical, profit sharing on the whole development. This was the jump I'd been working toward. Commercial work, big contracts, real growth. I accepted the partnership and immediately started planning the expansion. Called Janet and told her we needed to restructure the business finances to support sustainable growth. Hired 2 more electricians within the week, both licensed, both experienced. I paid them proper wages and brought them into a crew that already knew how to work together. Janet helped me set up the accounting to track the commercial project separately. Got a line of credit from the bank to cover material costs up front. Everything was moving fast, but it was controlled growth, not desperate expansion. I learned from watching Vincent scramble and overextend. I was building something that could last. Vincent missed the second settlement payment, It was due on the 15th, and by the 20th, nothing had arrived. My lawyer got a call from Vincent's lawyer asking about modified payment terms. They wanted to extend the schedule, lower the monthly amounts. My lawyer pushed back hard. The settlement was already generous compared to what Vincent actually owed. The terms were clear. Vincent's lawyer tried arguing about financial hardship, but my lawyer pointed out that missing payments meant penalties according to the agreement Vincent signed. 3 days later, the check arrived with an extra $500 in penalty fees. Vincent was scrambling. His business was struggling, and the settlement payments were making it worse. Part of me felt bad. Most of me remembered 2 years of being told I should be grateful for $200 a week. Grace called me on a Wednesday night. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She told me she'd separated from Vincent temporarily and moved in with Mom. Her voice was different, quieter, less defensive. She said she was finally seeing how Vincent's pride and poor decisions affected everything. How he treated me, how he ran his business, how he handled stress by getting angry and breaking things. She said the marriage counselor asked her questions about Vincent's behavior that made her realize she'd been making excuses for years. Not just about me, about everything. She asked if we could meet for lunch, just the two of us. I said yes. We met at a cafe downtown on Saturday. Grace looked tired but more present somehow, like she'd been hiding behind something for years and finally stepped out from behind it. We ordered sandwiches and she started talking before the food even arrived. She gave me a real apology, not the half apology from before. She said she was sorry for not believing me, for choosing Vincent's version of events over mine, for telling me I should be grateful when I was exploited. She admitted she was scared to see the truth because seeing it meant acknowledging she married someone capable of treating family that way, meant admitting her judgment was that wrong about the person she built her life with. She said watching Vincent spiral over the past year forced her to see things clearly. His anger, his pride, his refusal to take responsibility. She saw how he treated me and realized he was capable of treating her the same way when things got hard. I told her I wasn't forcing her to choose anything. She made her choice 2 years ago when she backed Vincent instead of me. Now I was just living with the reality of that choice. We met for coffee again the next week, and this time Grace listened more than she talked. I explained that I could rebuild our relationship, but Vincent wasn't part of my life anymore. Not at family dinners, not at holidays, not ever. She asked if that would change if they got divorced, and I told her honestly that I didn't know. The damage went beyond their marriage. It was about her choosing to let me be exploited and calling it family loyalty. Grace nodded slowly and said she understood. She wouldn't push for reconciliation or try to sneak Vincent into situations. She just wanted her brother back, whatever that looked like now. The medical complex contract came through 3 weeks later. Janet called me while I was on a job site, and I had to sit down in the van to process the numbers. $240,000 for the full electrical build. Design, installation, inspection, everything. The project timeline was 8 months with milestone payments. I'd need to hire more people and probably lease additional equipment, but the profit margin was solid even with those costs. This single contract would bring in more money than I would have made in 3 years working for Vincent at proper wages. I called Max and told him we just landed the biggest job in company history. He whooped so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Vincent's final settlement payment arrived on schedule, delivered by certified mail with all the legal paperwork. $60,000 paid over 3 years, every payment made even when I knew it hurt his struggling business. I deposited the check and met with a commercial real estate agent the same afternoon. I'd been looking at properties for months, waiting for the right moment. Found a small building near the industrial district with good highway access and enough space for offices, a warehouse, and a proper workshop. The settlement money covered the down payment. I signed the purchase agreement 2 weeks later. The previous owner's sign came down and mine went up. Proper electrical services in bold letters across the front of a building I actually owned. Something I built from nothing after Vincent tried to keep me small and dependent and grateful for scraps. 3 years after I sent that text message quitting Vincent's company, I walked through my building doing a head count for the new employee handbook Janet was putting together. 15 people on payroll, licensed electricians, apprentices, an office manager, a purchasing coordinator. Every single one of them paid fair wages with health insurance and retirement contributions. Max ran the commercial division. Tucker headed up residential. Bobby managed the service and repair team. We had regular clients, steady work, and a reputation for quality and reliability. I proved you could succeed without exploiting people. That treating employees well made them work harder and stay longer. That family who watched you get cheated and told you to be grateful weren't worth sacrificing your dignity to keep around. Vincent's business barely survived with 3 employees doing small residential jobs. Grace and I had coffee every few weeks and talked carefully around certain subjects. Mom finally admitted she should have supported me sooner. And I ran a company built on the simple idea that people deserve to be paid fairly for their work.